crack at the chapter that Danielle also worked on. And I knew John wasn't happy with it when he outsourced a phone call to his friend Rod. I said, yeah, I think Rod wants to talk to you about that chapter.
That's right. That's right.
So, like I said, what goes around comes around.
That's my spiritual hitman. That Rod called.
So I got the message, and Danielle, I don't think you thought one word that Danielle changed in that chapter. So I stand before greatness here. Okay, with that, any other guests that we missed? Great. So we should introduce our staff. So we'll start with Andrews over here.
I am Andrews Renee, Chief of First Impressions.
Neil, Editorial Director.
Maria Jesus Aguilar, Director of Subsidiary Rights.
Johanna Van Gelling, VP for International Sales and Business Development.
Leslie Crandall, Senior Sales Manager.
Jeevan, Managing Director, Editorial.
I guess we'll go over to you.
Mayo Mori, Senior Manager, Editorial and Digital.
And a very cool guy.
Steve Tersante, President.
Emily Berger, Associate Editor. Shabnam, Sales Marketing Strategist. Zoe Mackey, Senior Digital Marketing Manager.
Bigley, Communications Associate, and I'll be live tweeting under the hashtag BKOut today, and also live streaming on our Facebook.
And I'm also live streaming as well, so we'll do a tag it.
We missed this table over here, so we can jump back to you guys.
Rosalie White, Director of Operations and Finance. Welcome to all of our guests.
James Kwani, Senior Accounting Manager.
Ariel Pesfender, Associate Director of Operations.
Courtney Schoenfeld, Design and Production Manager.
Edward Wade, Associate Director of Design and Production.
Liz McKellar, Sales Marketing Assistant.
Kate Dolan, Business Manager. Katie Sheehan, Senior Marketing. Senior Communications Manager.
Jason Vandening, Operations Associate.
Mike Riley, Associate Director, Sales Marketing.
Charlotte Ashland, Content Strategist.
David Marshall, VP, Editorial and Digital.
And a cool dude.
Marcel Whipple, Design Director.
I'm Ginger Winters. I'm the Associate Director of Human Resources.
Okay, got all the staff? All right, well, with that, we are on to the main event. It is a pleasure beyond belief to have John here and talking about this book, which is one of the most powerful books I've worked on. I mean, his other book was fantastic. I mean, he's asked me this a couple times, like, am I lying? I think this book kind of puts that one in the dust in terms of how powerful it is, because he's speaking mostly from his kind of personal experience and of success. And, you know, John would keep sending me comments from people, you know, bank presidents, politicians, and, you know,
I know the media is not one of your big things, but you probably shouldn't have your back to it.
Oh, okay.
It's only like, 20,000 people or something.
Okay, yeah. So, hi out there, everybody. I'll get my back here.
I had your back, yeah.
So, you know, I was telling John, he kept sending these chapters out to people, and they would write back, and some would say what they didn't like, or some, but mostly there was just people just giving all kinds of accolades, you know, for the work, and I'm like, why is he doing this? And in the course of this, I realized he's really showing leadership. He's really weighing with his community. He's getting support. It's not, even though these are his ideas, these are really, he's giving them out to the community, kind of getting them back. And the energy that kind of generates is just unstoppable, as you'll, I think, soon see when you talk to John. The amount of support that he's built up, if you go to I've had the privilege of going to the Dignity Forum, maybe we'll be talking about what's happening here in a week, and you're talking tens of thousands of people out there, and, you know, all the way from, you know, Bill Clinton to, you know, somebody who just started a, you know, new cleaning business, all in the same room, and it's just like the most amazing thing you'll ever see, and it's just, and the word hope just keeps coming back again and again and again, and that's really kind of where this book kind of lands too, around this theme of hope. So I don't think I can say anything more than that. I'll just turn it over to John.
Hey, everybody. Hi. Honored to be here. And you guys are just a really cool publishing house. And now you even have cool digs to match it. I thought I was in like a hippie compound the last time. You know, I didn't quite know whether I was publishing a book or starting joining some, you know, movement to improve democracy in your office in San Francisco. And but this is very elegant, and it matches the energy very well. You've been able to upgrade your operation without destroying the soulfulness of the place. I love the spirit of BK, and I love that you want to do well and do good. Do well, do it by doing good. You got your own foundation. Guilted me into giving you some of my own money. It's sort of going in the opposite direction of authors normally work with their public. And you know, they give you no money and make you feel good about it. It's really unbelievable. It's a really brilliant business plan. And the next thing they'll be telling me is they want me to pay to have them publish my book. And the way they work, I'll actually be honored to do it. But on a serious note, I'm really, I've been with several publishers. I was with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s publisher, my first book, Beacon Press in Boston. And I've been with several other publishers, and this one just sort of feels like home. And I even recommended you guys to my friend Dan Jones, who now we sort of generally agree we're going to write a book together. Danielle and I are already scheming on my next book, my next two books, and so I've got 3 in the hopper. But let me just say that that history never feels historical. First of all, hello, Facebook family, and there and there. On mine, we have about 23.5 million people who watch these videos in the last 12 months on John Hope Bryant Live. We've got about 10 videos that have over 1 million views, and one video that has close to 4 million views. The average video gets 50 to 100,000 views over a period of time. So this will get some coverage, and we're starting a new movement. What I keep telling them is that history never feels historic when you're sitting in it. It just feels like another day. It takes 25 years to look back at a moment and say that was historic. But nobody in the midst of history said things are doing anything special. I mean, Dr. King went to career day for his kids. He went to the grocery store. You know, it wasn't 13 years of I have a dream speeches every day. That's not the way it works. And in fact, there were many very boring staff meetings. And he gave that I have a dream speech 100 times before the marshal in Washington. Many times in rooms where people thought that he was boring them senseless and they were going to sleep, and he was wondering by the 87th time, why am I doing this? Nobody cares. But if he'd given up the 88th time, the world would be different. So a lot of this is just persistence and never giving up and pounding on the message and having a vision. So I have a vision. And if you look at the narrative of my books, you'll see it sort of framed out. The first book was financial literacy. And by the way, this whole vision speaks back to when I was a kid, when I was 9 years old. Everything I'm doing today, I basically learned in a couple years between 9 and 10 years old. When I was 9, my mother, I remember, told me she loved me every day of my life. And nothing's more powerful than a child being told that they are loved by their parents. And my dad owned his own business for 54 years. So I had a very powerful sense of yes, I am, and yes, I can. And I think that half of poverty today is low self-esteem and lack of confidence in yourself. In the world, not American poverty, not black poverty, not white poverty, no. By the way, anything I'm saying, it has to be global in context or it's wrong. And I want you to challenge everything that I'm saying. And this is the first time I'm doing this, by the way. It's the first time I'm having this conversation ever. I've intentionally not talked about this book. I've intentionally not brought all this together ever. So this is a bit of a coming out party for me. But I'm going to try to do this succinctly, and I try not to use 20 words when 2 will do. And I think that, you know, a friend of mine once told me, if you can't explain something simply, as if his old, slightly senile auntie can understand it, it's not clear in your own head. And I'm glad he talked about his auntie that way. I could never do it. But the point is that you shouldn't have to hear a 2-hour homily from somebody in order to get the message. This should be crystal clear and simple. So the setup for this should be the longest part of this conversation. The conversation itself should be actually pretty dang on simple. So when I was 9 years old, I already told you my mom and dad told me they love me, and that speaks to half of the definition of poverty, which is low self-esteem and lack of confidence in yourself. And then I had these great role models and a great enabling environment. And I think, you know, everybody wants to be successful. If all you see is symbols of success in your neighborhood are rap stars, athletes, and drug dealers, then why is anybody surprised that kids grow up in a certain neighborhood wanting to be a rap star, an athlete, or a drug dealer? It actually makes perfect sense. You're modeling what you see, and if you hang around 9 broke people, you'll be the 10th. So that's your environment. And when I was growing up, this banker came in my classroom who happened to be Caucasian, and he wore a blue suit, a red tie, and a white shirt. He was a banker from Bank of America, and I say that intentionally in Compton, California, where I grew up in South Central LA, where you didn't see a white man in a suit unless he was a detective. And it was a bad suit, as in not a good suit. Not as bad as in that's a bad suit. It was a horrible suit. And this guy this suit was sexy, and it was a nice suit. This dude was doing well. And this speaks to the theory that I say in civil rights today, not civil rights, but civil rights in the suites, not the streets, about class and poverty, not race and the color line. If you deal with class, you get race for free. And whether you're white, black, red, brown, or yellow, you want to see some more green today. The new color is green. And I say that because this banker came in my classroom in a black neighborhood, and the only thing I could say to him, teaching me financial literacy in home economics class, which doesn't exist anymore, the only thing I could say, Steve, to him was, sir, what do you do for a living? And how did you get rich legally? Because in my neighborhood, nobody wore suits. In my neighborhood, if you had that kind of money, you were running from somebody or after somebody. But you weren't just chilling like he was. I mean, he didn't have a care in the world. And no one had a business card in my neighborhood. Nobody was on a salary in my neighborhood. It was all hourly workers. I know this may sound like common sense, but I mean, and then he used a word. He said, well, son, young man, I'm a banker and I finance entrepreneurs. I said, I don't know what the hell an entrepreneur is, but if you're financing them, I'm going to be one. And I went and looked up the word entrepreneur. God is my witness. No one had ever used the word entrepreneur in Compton, California in the years that I grew up. I had never, up to 9 years old, had ever heard that word, a French word, entrepreneur, in my life. The endorphins popped on the right side of my brain, which is where creativity and hope and self-esteem and confidence and joy and belief and faith, all that resides on the right side of your brain. And until that pops, the analytical side of your brain is asleep. In fact, it's worse, it's cynical. And then I found out that after role models and environment on the poverty scale, you have aspiration. And an aspiration is a code word for hope. And the most dangerous person in the world is a person with no hope. And when he told me he financed entrepreneurs, it was like seeing a roadmap out of my poverty-stricken neighborhood. And I went home and I saw a tweet, the next door neighbor, through a different lens. My best friend George, who was smarter than me but had crap, actually went from hanging out with teachers and hanging out with me to hanging out with Tweet. And he got killed on the same street corner as Tweet. When I was 10, he was 18, so that unless I mention George's name, which I try to do every time I give a speech, I'm afraid the world will just forget about him. Because even though he could be mayor or an editor at BK or CEO or an entrepreneur, no one's going to remember Tweet or George because they're gone. They didn't get the memo. And I said, you know, this poverty thing here, this is a racket. And we got to figure out how to unpack power and repack it with poor people in mind. And I know the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different outcome. So whatever we're doing, it hasn't been working. And one of them is getting emotional about everything. And I want to be logic-based about this. And so I took this guy's message. I went back to my home and I said to my mother, I was looking at the opportunity in my neighborhood, the liquor store sold candy, and he was out of the way to my school, but people went to him because it was the only game in town. the first thing I did is go to the liquor store and said, sir, you're selling the wrong kind of candy. He said, go away, little boy, I've got a college degree. I said, that's nice, I've got cavities. I'm 9 years old, you should be listening to me. And he said, go away, little boy. Remember Steve Jobs went to the head of IBM when he was a consultant there and said the future was software, not hardware. And the head of IBM said, I'm the largest company in the world. How dare you? Who do you think you are, you arrogant little young man? Get out of here. And thank God he got fired and went home, and he sort of quit fired, went home to his garage and created Microsoft. Microsoft. The future of computing. But at the moment, at that time, it made no sense. Because at that moment, IBM was literally the biggest company in the world. It took transformational thinking. The same thing happened basically to Steve Jobs. Fired from his own company. And so when I was 9 years old, this liquor store owner, Mac's Liquor Store, Mr. Mac, laughed me out of the place and said, look, but you got good for gab, I'll hire you work at the front counter. I said, I don't want to work at the front counter. I want to work as a box boy. He said, that's the worst job I got. That's the one I want. So he hired me to shut me up. And I worked there, Steve, for 3 weeks and quit. And he said, why are you quitting? I said, well, you know, you're not listening, and I've learned everything I need to know. And I learned that what I told you was absolutely right. You're selling the wrong kind of candy. I learned by working back in the coal box that the stuff that wasn't moving is the stuff that you are promoting. I also learned you bought your candy from Ira's Food Store and Smart and Final, which is where I'm going to next. and I know your wholesale rate and your retail rate, which was what I learned out of that financial literacy course. And I went home and borrowed $40 off my mother because she wouldn't give it to me. I certainly asked her to give it to me, but she said, life is tough, you got to pay it back. And we went to Smart and Final, and I made $300 a week, selling candy out of the door of my house on the way to school, and put the liquor store out of the candy business when I was 10 years old. Imagine what that did with the endorphins on the right side of my brain. Imagine what that did to my self-esteem, to my belief, my faith in institutions, my faith in entrepreneurship, my faith. Imagine what that did to my conversation about race relations, because basically this Caucasian man, was a gateway to me getting a greater understanding about. It was a Caucasian man, it was a black businessman. My dad was. So the color to me wasn't about race. It was about It was about green, and a whole bunch of people helped me to get my way out and forward. And I sort of got that memo, and I'm an entrepreneur today because of what happened to me when I was 10 years old. Then I found girls and lost the business. It was a recurring theme in my life. But different book. Fourth book, she says. So now let me frame this up. The first book was about financial literacy. That was basically what I learned when I was 9 years old. The second book was Love Leadership, and that was really how to live in a fear-based world. And I wrote that in 2009, but basically you can republish that today. It basically says that there's two things in the world: there's love and there's fear, and what you don't love, you fear. And the world is all screwed up is that most of our so-called leaders are leading by fear. That was 2009. But that was a way so that you didn't think you were crazy. I mean, so that you understood that there was a game being played in this world. And to quote President Bill Clinton, it's hard to get somebody to agree to the truth, and the lie is paying their paycheck. That truth was said by Jesus Christ, and we crucified him. Truth was said by Gandhi, and we shot him. Truth was said by Malcolm X. He came back from Mecca and said all white folks are the devil. He was dead in 2 weeks because he messed up with the business plan of his employer. I mean, too much truth can get you killed if you don't know how to frame it. So I wanted this second book, Love Leadership, to give you a more enlightened way to live in a world that seems to be against you, or as Scott Peck said, the road less traveled. The third book, How the Poor Save Capitalism, was meant to turn everything on its head and to be a disruptor and returning us to our storyline that all wealth in this world that didn't come from crime or war or government contracting literally came from poor people. Think about Walmart, largest retailer in the world. Started by who? Sam Walton, with a high school education, a pickup truck in the storefront. UPS, United Parcel Service, 400,000 employees today, started by Jim Casey with $100 in a bicycle. And go on and on and on. But these poor immigrants, Goldman Sachs was a guy named Goldman and a guy named Sachs with a briefcase going door to door, selling stuff that nobody wanted to buy in 1906. But today we call it an institution. Every big business was a small one, including BK Publishing. At some point you were one or two people, right? With a dream. How many employees now?
29.
29. You're the heart of America. Small business. Now, what does this have to do with this book? This book, this fourth book, is basically a cross between The Matrix and the movie Lucy. And if you haven't seen those movies, you probably should. But it's probably not what you think. Like the Malcolm X, I mean, the Matrix movie was not an action-adventure flick. Not at all. Go back and look at it with a different lens. He went from no faith and no confidence, looking at a computer screen, to reading code, and really having a life that not only lived by faith, he didn't even acknowledge certain things to be true, and because he didn't acknowledge them to be true, they weren't. The movie Lucy was a sort of an iteration of that too. The world became code. I sometimes feel that I see the world through a different lens. So here's the memo. The memo basically is everything the world never taught you about how power, money, and aspiration works. It's not written in a book until now. You're not taught in university. Your mother and father don't pass it down in stories at the kitchen room table. But it is literally everything. Let me give you a couple examples. What do we think capital is?
Money.
Yeah, really very rational answer. No. What's capital?
Hope.
I heard there's a bank. Oh, yeah, she's just playing right into me. No, no, that's not it either. But you'd be a great politician.
Our connections.
Hmm?
Our connections.
Close, but no.
Power.
Capital's power, no.
Someone's faith in you?
No. See, I love this. These are really smart people. And I know your endorphins are kicking the right way because you went running this morning before you came in to work.
What's left over after an investment?
No, that's a return on investment. Smart, but no. You probably work for the bank, same bank she works with. No, not, see how difficult this is. No, capital comes from the Latin root word capitas, which means knowledge in the head. It has nothing to do with money. I'll go one step further. Poverty has nothing to do with money. Wealth has nothing to do with money. Wealth is a way you view the world. I have a quote, there's a difference between being broke and being poor. Being broke is economic, but being poor is a disabling frame of mind, a depressed condition of your spirit. You must vow never to be poor again. Poverty is the opposite of wealth. Low self-esteem and low confidence. Crappy role models in a crappy environment. You hang around 9 broke people, you'll be the 10th. No hope, which leads to no opportunity. That's poverty. Has nothing to do with money. Capital, which is the root of your life, has nothing to do with money. Where is capital? It's inside of you. So you are the CEO of your life. But we're subcontracting our democracy. We're subcontracting our power. We think the mayor, the governor, somebody else is in charge of our life, and nothing else could be true. But that's not actually the crux of the book. That's just one piece of it. Here's another piece about the memo. That underneath almost everything in your life is money. Think about your day. You brushed your teeth this morning, I hope. Did somebody give you the toothpaste and the toothbrush? These are not trick questions. You bought them from someplace? The bed you slept on? You bought that? The sheets on the bed? I mean, these are basic questions, but literally, quite literally, from the moment you woke up, and actually even when you were asleep, to this very moment, I mean, this lunch was purchased from somebody. These chairs were purchased from somebody's paying lease on this building so that you can be here right now. Somebody's paying you a salary. We hope to be. I'm sure you'd do it for free if you could, but even the parking meter, an inanimate object with no personality and no emotions, is figured out capitalism. It's sitting out there charging you money right while you're sitting here getting a return on investment. We never got the memo on money, and this goes back to and I'm going to give an African-American analogy here for the moment. I think it's just very prescriptive. In 1865, March 3rd, 1865, Abraham Lincoln, after the Civil War, thought the most important thing he could do was to create a bank called the Freedmen's Bank. So, after the Emancipation Proclamation, after physical freedom, he signed the Freedmen's Bureau Act on March 3rd, 1865, whose mission was, quote, to teach freed slaves about money. And if you've never heard this story, it's okay, nobody else has either. And the same day he created this bank was under the Freedmen's Bureau Act. He created also a separate executive order that put "In God We Trust" on U.S. currency. Same day. And I think that, while I can't get in Lincoln's head, I think the message was simple. Never again do we want government-endorsed capitalism and something like slavery ever to meet. Ever again. And so he created this Freedmen's Bank to teach free slaves about money. It was located where? Now, we all know that Washington, D.C. is proximity to power. So let me tell you where it wasn't located for the moment. Are there important government institutions in Virginia and Maryland? Not a trick question. Yeah, the CIA, you got a lot of very important institutions in Virginia and Maryland, but it wasn't there. Washington, D.C., one could argue it's probably going to be, somewhere the regulators are located, which is anywhere from the outskirts of southeast Washington, southwest Washington, D.C., or where the Federal Reserve is located, which is, I think, about a half a mile from the White House. The answer is no. Congress, no. Senate, no. Where was it located? White House, what was the first federal building ever made in America? First federal building ever constructed. No trick questions. These are not trick questions. I want you to think about it, how smart, how much brain power is in this room, and we can't figure this out. First federal building ever constructed in this country. It is not a trick question.
Not Treasury?
It is Treasury. The only federal building, Bravo, that shares a lawn with the White House.
Right.
It has a tunnel underneath, connects to the White House. And it's no accident. During the Civil War, you have the White House for policy. What was to the left?
Money.
That's to the right. That's Treasury. What's to the left? So I'm looking at the park now. What's to the left? We now call the old Executive Office Building. Well, what was it? Department of War. So what are the three most important things you need in front of you, the President of the United States, in 1861? And a way to finance it. So you made decisions about policy. You went to the left. You made some war decisions. You came back to the government. You write an executive order to finance that. But you had to go to the Treasury to get it paid for. By the way, where did every federal office come from? Every federal office in America, where did it come from? Treasury Department. Census is about money. HUD, Housing and Urban Development. Department of Commerce. I mean, you name the department. Every one of these came from Treasury, and then they got so big they had to have their own offices at some point, but they all were centered initially in Treasury Department. So you have the park in front of you that's in honor of the French that helped us with our freedom from Great Britain. You got to the left, the Department of War. You got the White House in the middle. You got the Treasury to the right. You got the Blair House, Caddy Corner, which is where heads of state, visiting heads of state, the former presidents, future presidents stay. And then what over here is to the right, right across the corner, right across the street? Treasury Annex Building for 125 years. That's where our financial espionage work is done. Treasury Annex Building across the street from the Treasury, but what is it called today? A year after I went to the Treasury Secretary and said, guess where the Freedmen's Bank was located? It was located across the street from the White House. It was located where the Treasury Annex Building is currently located, and I got them to rename January 7th of last year, to rename the Treasury Annex Building the Freedmen's Bank Building in honor of former slaves, and put 72,000 former slaves with every dollar they had in that bank. $52 million then, $100 billion today. Because Lincoln wanted to look out the window. Am I boring you guys with too much detail here? No. Lincoln wanted to, I've never done this before, so I've never unpacked this. I'm trying, unfortunately, these 5 sections, I'm going to have to give you a treetop of each one of them. Otherwise, we'd spend 2 hours on each section. I'm going to give you a treetop of this so that you can see where I'm going with this narrative. So Lincoln wanted to be able to go to the residence upstairs, look out the window, and see the candles burning in his most important social experiment. And he was killed the next month. April 1865. But let me back up, because it's more extraordinary than that. What happened 2 months before Lincoln was signed this executive order, 3 months before he was assassinated? January 1865, there's no way you're going to know this, so I'm going to tell you the answer. Atlanta, where I live now, was burned to the ground. It was called the March to the Sea. It was part of the Union strategy to break the confidence of the Confederate Army. Not to break the structure of the Confederate Army, not to break the ranks of the Confederate Army, not to break down, kill enough people, no, to break the psychological confidence of the Army. They burned Atlanta down and marched all the way to the sea, and it worked. So Atlanta didn't exist. So where did they meet? Savannah, Georgia. So Secretary of War Stanton, the General Sherman, met with 20 former ministers, former black slaves, and said, what do you want after slavery? Did they say we want a government social services program? No.
That was never said.
Did they say we want a handout or welfare?
No.
What do you think they said they wanted? You're getting ahead of me, but yeah, they wanted land. They said we want to do for our. You see how natural that was? That wasn't a black answer, a white answer, a Latino answer, an Asian answer. Well, it's just a human answer. Everybody wants, if given a chance, to do for themselves. They want a hand up, not a handout. Teach me how to fish, don't just give me a fish. This is as natural as breathing. So they said great, because they knew going to the meeting what they wanted. So they already agreed to give them Field Action 15, which was 400,000 acres from North Carolina down the coast, ocean front, 30 miles in, all the way to what you call Miami, Florida today, was set aside for former slaves. Now we say today, that's really cool, oceanfront property. But if you're in the agricultural age, where's the worst place in the world to plant some seeds? On the beach. You wake up in the morning and your seedlings are in Jamaica. But we didn't complain about it, we didn't whine about it, we just got to work, and we so impressed. By the way, no Snapchat, no email, no cell phones, no nothing, no way to communicate. Somehow 1,000 former slaves got the memo that land was available, hustled down to this property, took up their shovels, took up their land, and tilled that uncertain soil with such confidence that a month later, February, the general said, my God, they're so impressive, give them a mule. Which was basically saying today, give that farmer a tractor. They are true investors. That was February. What happened now in March? The bank. For the purpose of what? Financing the crops, the land, and the aspirations of, can you see it now? Those 3 months were extraordinary. Land, machinery, money, and education about money and how it worked. And then Lincoln gets killed in April. Now, we don't have time for the details here. I think I unpack this in some detail in the book of what came next. But basically, if you want to know why Reconstruction ended, I just gave you your answer. 1870, Reconstruction came to a grinding halt because the president after Lincoln was a Southern segregationist who could not reverse what Lincoln did to a Republican Congress, by the way. You never know who your friends are going to be. So he said, he said to the Southern governors, if I can't end it, I can ignore it. He pulled his federal troops out of the South and told the Southern governors, do as you like. Now, I'm going to fast forward from 1870 to 1958, and I'm going to now introduce a guy named Martin Luther King Jr. to you, who gave his entire life to get back to zero. Because what he's now fighting in 1958 with my mentor Andrew Young, who I was with yesterday, we just yesterday acknowledged the 49th year of Dr. King's assassination in Memphis, which is where I was 2 days ago. But what was Lincoln trying to do? I mean, what was Dr. King trying to do with Andrew Young in 1968? Was he fighting for more jobs, more entrepreneurship, more home ownership, more scalable aspiration, or was he just trying to get the whites only signs down? You see, the Southern governors had created local laws in direct conflict with federal law. And the 4 civil rights bills that we celebrate today weren't really civil civil rights bills, they were enforcement actions because you already had every right that they basically reinforced by getting the federal system back into the South. And Dr. King gave his life on a balcony in Memphis, Tennessee in 1968, 100 years basically, give or take, from when Lincoln was killed to basically get us back to zero. Here's my point. It's not like black folks got the memo on free enterprise and capitalism and money and screwed it up. We never got the memo. Now, you want to understand why black folks in this country, I mean, we all have problems today, but when mainstream America has a headache, black folks have pneumonia. If you want to understand why black America as a group of people have less organized economic aspirational success than every other group in this country, I just explained it to you. We are brilliant. We are amazing. Whenever the playing field is level and the rules are published and we can compete, we excel, which is why we do good in sports, in creativity, in creative spaces, in all these places that the rules are published, the talents are natural, and as long as you can speak to that, people respond. But there's a game called capitalism and free enterprise that it needs to be understood at its root, and we never got the memo. And if you don't believe this, think about this. Every urban inner city community we care about has a check casher next to a payday loan lender, next to a rent-to-own store, next to a title lender, next to a liquor store. And they are 500 credit score neighborhoods. And there's never been a riot in a 700 credit score neighborhood in America's history of any race. Only 500 credit score neighborhoods riot. Does this apply to my white friends? Absolutely so. Absolutely yes. It's called rural America. They just riot at the ballot box. They didn't have a White Al Sharpton until recently. Some of you will get that later. And I mean no disrespect to my friend Reverend Al Sharpton. They didn't have a voice. 2009, $120,000 a year, got another job 2 years later making $80,000 a year, and we report them as employed, but they're underemployed and stressed out, arguing with at home without money, with their wives and husbands, and can't send their kids to college, and all that economic stress comes together, I believe, in the elections that you just witnessed, which was about cratering jobs and economic fear, and not about any of the stuff that you have been told is true. You want to go back to history. Look at every time you had social unrest in the world, you have an economic crisis that became before it. Before World War II, the economy of Germany imploded. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me come back to this point, then I'm going to pivot, because I look at Neil looking at his watch. 5 minutes. Is this interesting? I can basically go to any community, I can go to any city in America without touring it, without knowing any of the topography or the demographic information. I can go to the mayor and the police chief and tell you with absolute certainty, within 3 square miles, where all your problems are. I can tell you where your homicides are, your high school dropout rates are. I can tell you where your low college education attainment rates are, your low small business creations are, low entrepreneurship rates are. I can tell you where your low unemployment rates are. I can tell you also, alternatively, where your tax base is. And it's all credit scores. Because wherever you have a 500 credit score, you have a depressed economic condition and high levels of stress and everything that comes along with it. Crime, homicides, hypertension, diabetes, heart attacks. All the drama is in concentrated places. Because if you hang around 9 broke people, you'll be the 10th. And conversely, I can also tell you, irrespective of race, where your tax base is coming from. Because those are 700 credit score communities. Because 700 credit score communities don't riot, they want to go shopping. So there's a memo on money that not only black folks didn't get. 8/10 of the world's population have never gotten this memo, which is exactly why all your friends are stressed out. Everybody you know has got too much month at the end of their money. Can I get an amen? It may be you. 70% of this country is living from paycheck to paycheck. A fourth of this country would have to sell their car to raise $3,000. 138 million stressed out Americans, financially stressed out. I can go on and on and on, which informs all of your politics, all of your decisions, all of your life choices, including who you marry. Let me back up. Let me now go to something a bit more interesting. Relationship capital. This is half the book. Why do you pay 4 times more to go to Harvard, for those who went to Harvard? Because you're going to become 4 times smarter when you finish? Boom. You can come do this speech yourself. Did you hear? You go to Harvard for one simple reason, and only one reason. It's a nice place. I've got a little international certificate. I love it. It's a great place. You get to go there for 3 days. It's like a drug. You just want to stay there. Oh, this is amazing. This is wonderful. I get it. They also have like a $5 billion endowment, but I'm getting ahead of myself. You go to Harvard for one simple reason. Your group of graduating class is going to hook each other up for 40 years. That's it, ladies and gentlemen. That's the whole story. And the whole world's a club. BK, you don't just go randomly hire somebody off the street to be an editor. You know, if you're Jeevan because he's a radical, yeah, he may do it because he's trying to save the world. But then once Jeevan gets this talent and she's in the place, she's done a good job, then what do people say? Hey, Jeevan, how was Danielle? I kind of like her. She's a nice person. You think she could do this other project? And then how many projects have you done now, give or take?
I do about 2 a month.
Okay. For how long? How long have you been associated?
With Barcola?
Yeah.
10 years.
Hello. No one's looked at her resume or checked her credit score or whatever, and I don't know. Yeah, 10 years. They just like, oh, she's fantastic, right? I met you through a relationship. And I met you through him, and you still regretting it. You think about any important decision you made in your life, you didn't go to what we called back in my day the phone book. Any important thing to you, cancer surgery, something going on, but it's really important. So you need a daycare for your son or your daughter. You call your girl, who do you use? Am I right or wrong? I'm sorry, I'm from a black church. I'm actually having a conversation with you. So again, I don't have time really to get, but this is really so obvious when you really think about it. The whole world works in relationships, and it's concentric circles. So if you're wealthy, guess who you hang around? Private clubs, private schools, gated communities, private planes, private islands, private lives. And do you think that community builds on itself? Of course it does. Who do you then do business with? I mean, do you really think that boards of directors are filled with 65-year-old white men because they all got up one day and said, ooh, let's screw poor people. Ooh, we hate black people. So a friend of mine was in Harlem one day, and he says, this was going back 20 years ago. Reagan is a racist, President Reagan. President Reagan's a racist. Reagan's not a racist. I know him. They were born on the same day. He's a decent man. His politics are not my politics, but I met him. He's a decent guy. No, President Reagan's a racist. No, he's not. No, he's getting emotional. Slow down. Calm down. Let me explain this to you. Explain. Explain. Let me explain this to you. Reagan don't know no black people. He ain't related to no black people. He didn't grow up around no black people. He's not associated with black. His wife ain't a sister. You need me to translate that for you, sister? He don't hate you. He ain't thinking about you. You're not even on his radar screen. He's got no relationship with you. The problem in the 21st century is not love or hate. It's radical indifference. When I don't care enough about you to hate you. And that's why private gated communities and private schools and private lives scares the death out of me, because it's a separation of us from us. And so now you can have Steve Jobs on the south side of Detroit, and all you recognize is a drug dealer. Same skills. Drug dealers are immoral, unethical. There's a special place in hell reserved for somebody. I want to make sure people, you guys hear I'm saying this. Special place in hell reserved for somebody who sells death to their own community. So I'm not endorsing drug dealers, but I am saying they may be dumb, but they're not stupid. In fact, they're brilliant. A successful drug dealer, a bit of an oxymoron, understands import, export, finance, marketing, wholesale, retail, customer service, security, territory, and logistics. You've got Steve Jobs, I don't know, every 5 miles in the poorest neighborhoods in America who are now known as hustlers. By the way, you know where NASCAR came from? Moonshiners. I'm not kidding. It literally came from moonshiners who got tired of running the police and realized it wasn't a career choice that had long-term consequences. So, that were positive, so they turned it into NASCAR, which is now a legitimate business with corporate logos on the side of it. But yet we don't see that same analogy in the inner city with drug dealers somehow, that person can be transformed also. And I'm telling you, that's the future of America. Okay. Be good, be quick, and then be gone. I get it. Relationship capital is almost the whole ball game. But poverty builds on poverty, and wealth over here, almost completely separate, builds on wealth. Which is why you have idiots and fools running countries and companies and brilliant people who are homeless. You literally have brilliant people who are homeless because being smart enough is not enough. And the last chapter, which we definitely don't have time to get into, which is probably the most important chapter to me in the book, is spiritual wealth, which is basically my own personal manifesto, how I live my life. But there's 5 big bangs in this book, and I've given you, I've hit on 3 of them. And if you think this is a lousy book, you can make that conclusion with those 3 chapters I shared with you. But I don't want a good book. I don't want an interesting book. I don't want a best-selling book. I want a neck snapper. I want you to read this book and go, what? What did he just say? And have to read it again. In fact, Neil tried to dilute my last chapter. And we almost ended our friendship. I made you an honorary black man and you doing this to me? I almost kicked him out of my family. Luckily, Danielle, just hit the text room for like 4 weeks. Said, yeah, we got it fixed. And we lied to him.
It's all good.
Because that last chapter, you got to read it 4 or 5, hopefully 6 or 7 times. And I did that intentionally. I didn't make it complicated, but it is the whole ball game. And when you read Mere Christianity, C.S. Lewis, 1943 it is, you got to read that book like 7 times before you really get it. It's not long. Or the 7 Spiritual Laws of Success by Deepak Chopra, which I think was 5 years ago, 75 pages. You got to read that book 4 or 5 times. But it's simple wisdom, but it is such a neck snapper. It is such sort of counterintuitive from what society is telling you is the way this world works, that it takes you a minute to get that you've been bamboozled. You've been tricked. You've been fooled. And all I'm trying to do is make sure you get the memo. I'm done.
We don't have time for questions, but we can formally, John's going to be here, so if you want to come up and...
Well, one question too. I'm actually curious whether I actually did a decent
If you need
job
to go,
of
feel free, but those of you who want to stick around for some questions, have at it.
Yeah.
You're making this argument that momentum needs to shift from the racial discussion to the economic discussion. So I'm curious what you think are the underlying reasons that people want to put their energy into the racial discussion.
Well, mostly we're depressed. We're emotional creatures, first of all. We're not human beings having a spiritual experience. We're spiritual beings having a human experience. So it makes perfect sense that people want to be dignified. I talk about in this book, see, it's so much I didn't cover. I basically created a new class of people called the invisible class. And the invisible class, I think, are, 9/10 of the world's population who just don't feel seen. And I think when you don't feel seen, you become resentful. And when you become resentful, you become frustrated. And when you become frustrated and you've got no hope, as a dangerous, toxic mix that leaders, so-called leaders, can then prey upon, play upon, and basically manipulate. And I think that's what you're seeing in the world today. And if you don't know who you are, somebody's going to tell you, which goes back to self-esteem and confidence. You know, the Ku Klux Klan was created by the White Citizens Council, which were business leaders in the South who were afraid, fearful that majority of blacks would take over their business and take over their way of life. So they told ignorant, uneducated whites that black folks wanted to steal their stuff, go out with their wife, take their daughter, grab their job, go get them. So now you have ignorant, uneducated, unexposed whites going after equally uneducated, unexposed blacks in an emotional tirade that we're still fighting 100 years later, 150 years later, because I can argue that after the Civil War, that the Southern leaders decided to re-win the war through peaceful economic or non-war means. They killed the president, they took over the government, they pulled the federal troops out of the South, and they took the Rough Riders and sent them back in the South when there were no street lights at night and said run them off their land, the land that they had just been given. So I'm arguing that underneath all of this is economics, and in most cases it's been bad economics. But my friends who then want to throw economics out to say that capitalism is bad, I say to them capitalism is sort of like democracy. It's a horrible system except for every other system. And when Shimon Peres told me in Israel that when I laid this, it was in Jordan, he said, when you lay this out, John, you're going to be viciously attacked by all my liberal friends, he said, who feel a moral certainty. And he said, when they do tell you that, you tell them this: even if you want to distribute money like a socialist, you got to first collect money like a capitalist. That my friends in the Nordic countries have all this peace and serenity, only 3 million people per country, so easy to do. Underneath Norway is oil. Underneath Sweden is timber, which they're selling. They're not giving it away. They're selling it. So even you name a place that you call peace and serenity, and I'll show you an economic system underneath it. So for us not getting the memo is to not understand the underlying motivation. Meanwhile, we're being sort of played with by folks who find it in their interest to keep us confused. When I say us, I don't mean black us, I mean the majority of us. Because, by the way, we're driving the economy for the world. That's a whole nother, go back and read my last book. What I love about this, what I'm talking about is this is math. I'm not talking about an opinion. This is not my opinion. I challenge anybody to go back and confirm or negate everything that I'm saying based on simple facts. So I think that 70% of black Americans, as a result of 250 years of slavery, 100 years of Jim Crow, that ended in 1970, not 1870, are arguably clinically undiagnosed depressed. And if that's true, it explains everything. Because normal people just vote. But black folks vote when we're proud or we're pissed. We have to have a reason to vote. No, normal people just vote. You know, I go and touch this young lady on her shoulder. I don't know her. She says, "Yeah, can I help you?" You go to my neighborhood where I grew up and do this to a young black man. "Hey man, get your hand off me." Where's that come from? There's nothing wrong with him. He's depressed. He's had PTSD his entire day on life. He's touchy. He's like, I woke up angry. I think half the world's depressed, which is why we're making these silly decisions. And so I think we've got to get back to ourselves. If you ask me what do I do with Operation Hope, all I do is reintroduce you back to yourself. You were born perfect. You were born perfect. We learned hate. We learned racism. We learned discrimination. We learned to be cynical. You were born absolutely, undeniably perfect. One more comment. Is this, yes, ma'am. The lady who knows the book already.
No, I actually really wanted to hear about the 5th chapter because the other stuff I do know, and I think that this is really an intense thing, and I'm interested in the relationship between capitalism and having an abundance of spiritual capital and how those two fit together. I was thinking about this interview. A couple interviews on NPR with a reporter who's written about Robert Mercer, who's the biggest financier of the Trump candidacy and everything, and how he really believes that your only human value is measured by your salary and your income. And I'm wondering, like, how you kind of reconcile that kind of ultra-capitalist belief system with personal spiritual capital. You know,
wrong.
yeah, right. But you know, I mean, kind of taken to its extreme, that's what you would kind of come up with from a capitalist perspective. So I just wonder how you reconcile that. I see a lot of young people, like my stepdaughter who's just graduating from Howard, and she's trying to reconcile this world to make sense of it. It's tough to help her kind of sort those things out. So I'm just wondering.
Yeah. So you obviously asked the most. McNeil's like going crazy. He's like, he can't answer that question. I gotta figure out a way to talk about this book in 25 minutes, and I don't know. Neil's got to give me therapy or something.
Don't worry about Neil.
Because the last chapter would take 24 minutes, and that would be sort of doing this. So let me just sort of hit one or two crisp points. In the chapter, I talk about assignments, cognitive narrowing, and cognitive expansion. If you are a beautiful, hardworking Black or Latino woman or a white woman in a rural small town, because by the way, my white friends in rural towns have the same damn problem as my Black friends in urban America. They're the same depression, the same 500 credit scores, the same check cash next to a payday loan lender, next to a rent-to-own store, next to a title, which is why I'm opening offices in rural and urban communities today and raising credit scores 120 points over 24 months, because nothing changes your life today more than God or love and moving your credit score 120 points. And we're finding that you're changing the self-esteem, the confidence, the wellness, the belief levels, just by raising credit scores in a neighborhood to a point where you got positive vibrations and you get GDP jobs and you start obsessing about race. But that's another, I can't talk about that right now. So if you have this one example, a brilliant, amazing, positive Black woman with 2 kids and a job and a half, raising them by herself, surrounded by the typical urban neighborhood and all that comes with it, what's going to happen over time is cognitive narrowing. Are you with me so far? Yep. She's got all these negative inputs coming at her consistently. She's trying to get her kids to school without getting shot. She's trying to negotiate drama at the store. She's trying to get some gas. Make sure nobody's jacking her car. Her mind is not free. She is focused and obsessed about surviving, not thriving. She's stressed, not relieved. And all these negative people around you who are also depressed, who think out of love, they're to give it, girlfriend, why are you going to night school? Why are you doing all, why you just get on welfare? They think they're helping her. What's going to happen over time is she gets dumber. Temporarily, she's going to have cognitive narrowing. She actually temporarily, gets less intelligent. She's dumbed down by having to survive. And now she's not looking up. She's not trying to aspire. She's not trying to change the world. She's just trying to get the rent on Friday. Now, my wealthy friends who've got arts in schools, they go on a field trip, they hang out with Neil, they go to Steve's beach house and shit. I just want to hang out with Steve. And they think about the world, and they go on the after-school program, whatever. They got 2-parent households.